right now I want to get into an overview that you've been waiting for of these 7 conditions, give them a name, put them up on the screen so that you can see them, and also share some of the research behind them, mostly so that you can have some confidence that we didn't just think of these in a vacuum. It wasn't me sitting in an office somewhere and thinking of the number 7 and writing words to correlate to certain steps. That's not it at all. We learned this from the people that we worked with. And I'm so grateful for all the leaders and organizations that we've had the opportunity to work with over the years, because they taught us this. And we conducted actual academic formal research to gather data and learn about these conditions. And there was a lot of themes that appeared in the research in our gathering of the data. But these are the 7 most consistent conditions and themes that we came across that impacted people at those 3 levels again, or personal, organizational, and community level. So let's get into them. Okay, what the last few years taught us about conditions, and we use that term conditions, by the way, for the lack of a better term, right? We could say steps, process, you name it, but conditions are a bit more all-encompassing, and we also have control, a lot more control over a condition than we do an outcome. Transformation, to keep in mind, I'll say again, it cannot be forced. It does not happen quickly. Remember the finite and infinite. Remember the long game that I had already addressed. And I've said this many times, and I'll say it all the way through every video. It's always the journey, not the destination. So there's a transformational outcome or outcomes that exist out there that we want to try to accomplish. But transformation is the journey in getting there. And so that's important to remember as we cover these conditions. So let's have a look at them. Okay, there's 7 of them, and I'm going to pop all these 7 rings up here first. The first one we've set up well already with some of these previous videos. It's to have purpose. Having purpose is paramount and step number 1 in transformational change. Without it, it's hard to move really any further. The second is commitment. And I will put all these up, but trust that there's a video per condition in Module 2, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of detail talking about each one individually. That's saved for later videos, but I'll try to give you a basic idea of what this means. Commitment's pretty self-explanatory. Are we committed? Number 3 is common language. Having a language to share with others, and even a language to interpret things in your own life, is really important. Vulnerability. This is one that scares people. When they hear that word vulnerability, all sorts of things come to mind. But this one, if all the themes, if I could have a mark on how many times it was brought up, vulnerability was brought up probably more than any of the others. So that can tell you how important this one is. Consistency, pretty self-explanatory. Are we consistent? Are we disciplined in this? Another one, deep trusting relationships, like vulnerability, was probably one of the most common. Deep and trusting relationships, not the transactional handshake ones that we've been talking about. And then lastly, safe space. Now, safe space ultimately means a safe space to learn and to practice, to fail forward. That's just a lot of words to write into one circle, so I'm slimming it down to safe space, but that's ultimately what it means. So these are the conditions. I want to contrast all of this now with its opposite, because when these conditions are applied in terms of habits, behavior, process, procedure, you name it, transformation has a higher chance of success. So I want us to really focus in on that. Can't control these outcomes of transformation, but these, yes, we can have some kind of control in them. So to further understand transformation, it's important to understand the opposite of transformation. I've already mentioned what the opposite is. We've already thrown the word out there, transaction. That's how we actually started the course. But let's actually throw up the opposite of each of these conditions really quick. So there's 7 of them, and this is what's most common. And this is what I have personally witnessed in doing consulting work with organizations, coaching individuals, and working in communities especially. I've seen these play out in very tangible ways. Number 1 is, instead of having purpose, there's a lack in purpose. I can't tell you how many times I've shown up to meetings at any level where people are kind of floundering around why they're there. And people even raise the question, I'm not even sure why we're here. They just showed up. And we go through the motions because we have to go to meetings, we have to show up to convenings, and so we do this, we do that, and so there's a lack in purpose. And individually, people go through their life never fully defining and identifying what their purpose is. So again, without any of that, we lack purpose. It's going to be hard to continue in a transformational path thereafter. So the first thing that's far too common is lacking purpose. The second is tire kicking. So I use that term because I've seen it a lot. People just kind of testing things out, kicking the tires, wondering if it's something they want to take serious or not, and almost afraid of the commitment to something. So a lot of tire kicking is too common. Confusion is a big one as well. And this is the power of having a common language, is it gets rid of confusion. People can start to talk about things in the same way. Even if they have their different diverse backgrounds and experiences, having a common language to now problem solve, to come together is incredibly important. And even at the individual level, if we don't have a language to use to interpret things personally, it will be hard for us to continue down the path of transformation. Instead of vulnerability, we have self-preservation. Most people come in meetings, they got their guards up, they have their barriers, metaphorical barriers, don't want to be vulnerable, don't want to put themselves out there. That's something far too common. And obviously the opposite of consistency, what's far too common is inconsistency, sporadic here and there. We get motivated, but then, months go by and we didn't think about it anymore. Acquaintances. We have so many acquaintances. And if you think about and even look up the word acquaintance, it's having a friendship or a kinship with somebody, but there's no real depth to it. There's not a real true friendship there. There's no real relationship. It's being acquainted with somebody around a certain topic or a certain arena. So if we're acquainted with people at work, it's because, well, we work with them and maybe our departments sometimes collaborate. Beyond that, perhaps there's no real depth in a relationship. The same can be said at home, in our home life. Am I only acquainted with my kids, before bedtime, we have a conversation and then they carry on with their night and me with mine. And then the next day, repeat, and I just develop an acquaintance with them. There's no depth. I've been guilty of this, by the way. I've been guilty of this in my own life as a dad, back to my average story, where I was simply being acquainted with my kids every day, not working intentionally on depth in those relationships. And then lastly, instead of a safe space, it's the expected and typical milieu. We can almost predict, yep, we show up to things and we go through the motions and then we carry on. I go to work, get my paycheck, go home. I go to this community meeting, we say all the things, we do the stuff, and then we leave. And so instead of a safe and learning environment, it becomes the expected, almost norm to just go through those motions. So this is transaction. And if you are like me, life can sometimes feel this way far more often than it does not. And that is, for me, a problem. It's something that I want to address and change, and something that I want to help others as individuals and other organizations do the same. This brings us to change versus transformation. And we will use those words interchangeably, and that's okay, so long as we understand that there's a difference between them. If we separate them, is important to note. So, transformation is not an a la carte option. I'll start with that. Okay, this is the a la carte option. If these are the conditions of transformation, and I've seen this many times, we start to treat it like this. Some of these are disappearing. And we think, well, I'll work on this, and we maybe leave some of those other things by the wayside because I don't want to get vulnerable. That's not something that I sign up for. That's not something that I want to do. I'm not about to admit to my wife or my children all of my insecurities, or I'm not about to tell people, whatever it is, we don't consider it. And so, but we think, well, I'm working on these other areas. So that's great. I think that's amazing that we focus in and try to improve areas of our life, but that's change. Okay, and this is the biggest difference between change and transformation, is change, we can change things and we can experience awesome outcomes from those changes, but transformation is all of these in combination. All of these in combination all at once. Now, we're not perfect, so they don't all change like that on the dime, but it's the desire to create change in all of these areas that results in it being transformative. So that, to me, and something I want to share with you, is the difference between change and transformation. Transformation is the full meal deal. Change is an a la carte option. Both are great, but again, we're trying to pursue transformation in this course, and that's what I'm hoping you can get as a takeaway with everything that we're trying to do.